So thank you all so much for being here. I am videoing and recording sound so that I can post a link to this later for people who are not able to be here. So we can just imagine that there are 100 people that wish they could come, and they'll be so thankful if there's a link online.
Well, I've seen it quite a bit on Facebook, so I was, thinking, will it be on Saturday, like.
I got a number of emails from people who are traveling, and it's just totally understandable. I just kind of have to grab a date and do it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Actually want to start by passing this over to my good friend, who is the director of the Center of Art and Public Exchange at the Mississippi Museum of Art, Monique Davis. Because while I have called this meeting, it is a result of an initiative that Kate started. So that seems like a good place to start the story, is with Monique saying a little something about Kate. Hey, welcome. Say a little something about Kate, and then I'll pick up where the story begins with me.
So, Kate stands for the Center for Art and Public Exchange, but I like to rework the acronym. So I would say C stands for Compassion for All, A is Art as a Tool for Transformation, P is People at the Center, and E is Empathy Creates Equity. And that kind of sums up the mission of Kate, which is to use art as an anchor to have conversations, courageous, compassionate, civil conversations about issues of race and equity and justice and injustice, and how to create the world that we want to see using art as a tool to do that. And so it's a 3-year initiative funded by Kellogg, and this is part of their larger strategy to have conversations about race and reconciliation. And so CAPE has many programming elements. We have a national artist-residency. We have my colleague here, April, is part of the T. Willie Winter Institute that is training staff on how to have these conversations to deal with race and equity issues. We're getting ready to start a corporate leadership program because we also know that, the change has to also come from the top to the bottom in addition to kind of bubbling up from the bottom. And we have the in-state residency program, which Daniel is a part of. So we went to 6 communities last summer, actually about a year ago, and they were Hancock County, Oxford / Lafayette, not Lafayette, Lafayette. Okay, Lafayette County, Stone County, Meridian, Macomb, Utica, and I think I'm missing one. And we did listening sessions, which I think a couple people from this session came to, and we asked community members what your hopes are, what your aspirations are, what is challenging about this community. Then we gathered all that data, we put it on the website, and did a call for artists to say, hey, we want you to respond to these data points, but keeping in mind CAPE's core values, which are equity, transparency, and truth, and that the project has to be based on what the community wants, reference those values, and be collaborative and participatory with the community. We never want to come into community and impose what we think the community wants. So these projects are built on conversations and what the community has expressed. And so they're not always necessarily fully formed. And our artists are constantly having communications with community members, and the resulting project is going to be reflective of that. And so, so we're also kind of trying to disrupt what the traditional museum's role is, and we are immensely putting a lot of trust in the artists to kind of figure that out and giving them $10,000 to do it. $10,000 got to be done by the end of December because we know that we are still part of the nonprofit industrial complex, and so things have to have measurables and beginnings and endings. But our goal is we're hoping that relationships are created through this process that didn't exist before, and that we continue to be in relationship with you all as the Mississippi Museum of Art.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'm a technologically anxious person, so I'm just going to take one last check at these to make sure that time is actually ticking by.
We live in Jackson, so we drove up this morning. So we made a side trip to Water Valley.
That's the farmer's market?
We saw the farmer's market, but we wanted to go to like the Violet Valley, so I guess it's the only clear, is it, bookstore in the state, and so we wanted to see kind of what that was, yeah.
What's up? Hey Daniel, you shaved your beard off.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm trying to
I
be
didn't recognize
presentable.
you. He looks like a different person.
Maybe by the time I'm 40, I'll let it
Yeah, it'd be much cooler.
I was going to say, I'm sure it's a little cooler at the moment. Of course, I don't know. Yours
It never bothered me in the heat. It was kind of weird, yeah.
Okay, always thankful for double checking technology. And for my son, this is my son Vesper. He's probably excited he's out of the circle because we're about to do introductions. And there was a fierce negotiation over his introduction earlier, whether it would happen. So I'm going to introduce him as my super helpful assistant. He's going to restart the recording every 8.5 minutes. Because I can't control whatever setting makes it only for 8.5 minutes. So, let's do some introductions because we may not all know each other. And so maybe say your name and maybe one thought on either land or power, but no longer of a thought than like if you did this on your fingers, even slowly. So maybe 15 to 20 seconds. I'm Daniel, and as a parent, I often think about power and how to share it and how to not share it at all many times. So it's my thought on one of those words.
My name's also Daniel. See how long we people's go. I have lived in Oxford for 12 years and been involved in a lot of food, farming conversations locally, statewide, now doing national policy work and philanthropy. And a lot of it is around restorative justice. That's a loaded conversation with philanthropy as I'm learning. The 20 second? Land and power, I think what's really keeping me up late now is we know the aging farmer population, we know a lot of historical injustices with land and ag. Right now, 90% of our farmland, which is a lot of acreage, is not owned by farmers in this country. And increasingly more and more of it's not owned by people. They're owned by multinational corporations or foreign governments. The largest land acquisition in the United States is by Chinese wealthy people in the Great Lakes region. Looking ahead, there's investment opportunity there. And so increasingly more and more, and we're talking millions and millions of acres of our country's land is owned by people that never die. Businesses, corporations that there's only one way for this to switch, and it's not an easy way. And that's happening. It's happening. So corporate colonialism. It's happening elsewhere. It's happening here, and it's happening in Lafayette County in different ways. And in different ways, it's happened historically in Mississippi. So how is that? What's playing out today, and how we feel about that connect to what's happened in the past, and how we feel about that. What can we do about it? Reserve some land and power for future generations to actually. Thank you.
So my name is Abdullah. So I'm moved here to Oxford about 6 months ago.
Would you mind speaking?
That's
it's not the
right.
best.
It's the fan or something. I can't
I'm
hear.
a little hard of hearing, and
Just
I've turned my hearing aid up as far as it'll go.
No, please.
Just outside, just louder.
Abdullah's a small business owner who's new to Oxford, 6 months here, and that's it. That's all there's so far.
My name is Saeed. I am in Oxford 2 months ago. I was in New York. I came to Lafayette 16 months ago. Okay? I was in Paris. I'm from Morocco, originally from Morocco. I studied in Paris. I'm a visual artist. I'm working on human body, artistic anatomy, what we call in Paris morphology of the human body. And I combine both with phenomenology. I'm PhD in philosophy too. And I came here with a beautiful project. It's with Wayne and Jules. We create a festival, international festival of animation, cartoon, and comics for youth between 10, 12 till 18. Only for that's mean the particularity of this festival. It's not to have a guest, the famous artist and animation. It's not. No, it's open to everybody. We even if you never draw, not for professional. It's for really for men and women of tomorrow. So for children and young, and because I believe that art it's helped to build us as human beings. It helps us to concentrate, to be a better human being, better citizen. So, like if we guarantee the beautiful citizen of tomorrow. So that's my first workshop to show what the origins of my work, combine philosophy with art, with the artistic anatomy. It's August 10 here, and I hope you will be here to discover. Of course, I will answer to all your questions about what is art. I passed 30 years to answer what is art, what for. It is for to be famous to earn money or for life, for share with others. So we will see how. Thank you. So,
Thanks. My name is Robert. I'm at the University Museum and Roanoke, and grateful from the start for the Cape project of the Mississippi Museum of Art and the Kellogg Foundation that funded it, because this has been a remarkably interesting development in Daniel's hands, and grateful to Daniel beyond all measure for bringing it to Oxford. Land and power, I was thinking that the biggest impacts for me in the subject of land and power have actually been in the last 2 years serving on the University of Mississippi's Slavery Research Group, where study of slavery and the origins of building this campus, and in the enslaved living on the site of the Shigog estate, which we now know as Roanoke, has been a real remarkable experience for me personally to join. Over 50 faculty of the university actually studying slavery at this university. So, thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
I'm Jason, and I'm a little bit more interested right at the present. While all the guys sat on this side and all the girls sat there's a story to be told there.
There's three big brothers, so
I have to. I'll confess, and Daniel knows this. I'm here out of curiosity more than anything. I don't know.
Can you speak up?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Why don't we all speak in a little bit?
The fan, it's been.
As long as that won't. Great job. I don't have any preconceived notions or preconceived questions, for that matter. But I'm just here out of curiosity, and like the theme that Daniel has thrown out for us to chew on. Anyway, that's why I'm here.
Well, you chose to sit there. You couldn't sit over there.
I was one with my brothers here. I saw an opportunity.
Well, what was the theme again?
So
I couldn't hear hardly anything over there. Sorry.
the theme is land and power. So the relationship between land and power.
Well, I'm interested in the power of the people to have a place to live. And there are so many people around here that can't afford to live around Oxford anymore. And the power of the people who have money should share. That's what I'm interested in. And also in justice for people who have, in the past centuries, not had justice, and therefore they are stuck where they are.
And your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
I'm Debbie Myers. I am a watercolorist. I'm an artist. Plein air has kind of been my little thing in the last 4 years. And the land. I mean, I am a transplant to Mississippi, been here 10 years. But I feel a connection with Mississippi in getting outside and painting this beautiful land that we have that needs to be preserved. But I mean, that's kind of my passion, and that's what I see. I don't see. I really don't. I mean, I'm here to learn too, like Jason. I mean, I want to. What is this all about? I'm kind of here representing my plein air group because they couldn't come today, and just find out, you know, what this is all about. And because we love Mississippi, we love the land, and we love to go out there and paint it.
My name's Monique. I am, like Amy said, the managing director of CAPE, and we have been struggling with this issue of combining a land acknowledgement statement along with an acknowledgement of stolen people. And I am fascinated about that idea because while the practice of museums is starting to get into the land acknowledgement statement, we haven't figured out a way to marry these two concepts.
Hi, I'm April Grayson. As Monique said, I work with the Winter Institute, but I'm a fifth generation Mississippian, and I've been very deeply influenced by the land that my family owns in rural Jones County for 5 generations. And also coming to terms with that, when I discovered when it came into my family was during one of the Indian Removal Acts. So basically it was stolen land. And wrestling with how deeply emotionally attached I am to that land, and what it means in terms of inheritance, because my family doesn't have any cash inheritance, but the land is all the inheritance that I will have. So, and my father just died quite a month ago, and that was his continuation of land. And so thinking about inheritance, thinking about you know, at some point when my mom passes and I do inherit that land, what do I do with that legacy? What do I do with that in terms of the idea of reparations? And I also spent time living in Canada where at every public event they make a land acknowledgement. And so I've been trying to think about how to incorporate that into my own practice as a racial justice practitioner and also an artist and filmmaker. So it's a very dear subject to me.
April, watch the film The Descendants, where you see George Clooney struggle in Hawaii with the issues and his family with the issues of inheriting contested land. It's incredibly powerful.
Great, thank you.
It's a good film.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Peggy. I no longer live in Oxford. I did while I was in school, but I'm visiting Karen, who does, and she said, "Oh, let's go to this really interesting meeting." But I did. But I don't know what it's about. I said, "I don't know what it's about." But I did. I read the little synopsis on, I guess, the Facebook. I said, "Okay, sounds like, you know, something's really interesting, so let's go." And I'm really glad I did because I think it is interesting, and I think it is something that needs to be addressed. Corporations consuming land takes it away from individuals, because that means there is less for the family farmer, or less for someone to have, you know, a few acres that they want to grow their own food or raise a couple of animals. And as you talk about reparations, people, I mean, that is, most people don't ever think about the reparations and how the land came in to their family years and years ago. So thank you, I'm glad to be here.
Well, I just want to say, I met Peggy probably 30 years ago when our kids were in school together. And so she lives in the town of Oklahoma, Mississippi, and her, you know, and I've watched the town, you know, there's not much in Oklahoma, they're beautiful homes. I've watched them just disintegrate, and like you, before, you know.
The homes I bought.
Yeah, no, beautiful. No. So but that, I just want to add that. I'm Karen Smith, and like I said, I really wasn't sure what this was about, but I kind of have concerns what Mary was talking about. Affordable housing, what's happened to, you know, purchase of property. You can't afford anything in them anymore. It's hard for just the average Joe to afford property in Oxford. I just bought some property out toward past College Hill, toward Coontown, out College Hill Road, and the, you know, there's a road being cut through the highway that's going to connect, you know, that loop, and so my property was affordable. I bought 10 acres, and but I'm really kind of concerned about what's happening. You know, I have every day I drive, if I want to drive up toward the switch road, you know where the switch road is from, that I drive and I look at probably these, you know, I'd say poor families and there's a community of people there. It's mostly African American, and I don't know, I just feel like it's just so unequal what I see. I feel sorry for people that want to live in Oxford, want to buy some property, and they can't. And I was lucky enough to mortgage my house, and I have a house near the square that I still own, and I was lucky enough to, you know, I had enough equity in it. I've been here since 1977, and I've seen this town, you know, change so much, some for the good, some for the bad, and it breaks my heart every time I see just trees plowed down, you know, for subdivisions, the ugly subdivisions that are going in, and every tree destroyed. And I did not know what this was going to be about, but I thought it might have something to do with what's happening, you know, to the land around here. I've got a little cushion, you know, around me where I can still see deer and animals, and I guess that's going to go on for a long time, it being rural Mississippi. But anyway, that's why I'm here.
I'll just reiterate real quick, because I know some of y'all come in since we started going around the circle, and so we're just giving our names and talking a little bit about our thoughts on the subject of land and power. And you can just choose one of those if you like, and just talk about thoughts around land or power. And then I'll also just mention that we are videoing this and recording audio, and that will be online available for people who can't attend the meeting. So just be aware that the things you say will not just disappear into the air.
Yeah, so there you go.
All right, I'm fine with that. My name is Rebecca. I know several people here, not everybody. I wanted to come say hi, and I'm Rebecca. You know who I'm parents. Okay, so that's a good segue because I grew up in Oxford, but I was not born here. And my interest is my work. So I'm a visual artist and a historian, an art historian, and kind of using history as a medium and representing that in many different ways. And what I'm really interested in is the shift that in my lifetime, growing up in the United States and thinking, oh, this is the melting pot. Everybody's here. We're a strength because of the diversity that comes in, and people are generally mobile, and maybe your family lives on the other side of the country and all this. I was from California, and then I moved here when I was a little kid. And the story is very different in Mississippi, where I feel like actually there is a lot of migration, and there are a lot of people like me who count this as home, but we've only been here a few months or a few years or one generation or 5 generations, but yet the story of the South and Mississippi, it seems like it's very simplified into preconceptions of who's been here and for how long, and that everyone is part of a history in a certain way and doesn't take into account all the different other voices here and the timelines and stuff. So I'm interested in migration stories, and even for my own self, making work about being from the South. And then I made a project about being Canadian because my mom's Canadian and they're Mennonites, so they always migrated all around. And I learned a lot in my art history MA. I've studied the African diaspora and contemporary art, using how artists who are of African descent, but maybe practicing in Europe, practicing in Caribbean, practicing in the US, how they're juggling this inside-outside identity, how they can be based in Paris, but also be Nigerian or whatever. So I kind of learned a lot from that, and I'm trying to study the South and study my place here, thinking about you have to be all the way in to be Southern, and I actually think a lot of people aren't, and I'm interested in that story. I don't know if that has to do with land and power, but I think it has to do with bringing in complexity to the conversation. So, yeah.
Good segue. My name is Rhonda Piers, and I'm speaking, but I can't really hear myself speak because I just got off a double-decker tour. So I do a lot of things, and this will probably be the briefest I ever am because I'm tired of talking. It's been 2.5 hours of talking. But anyway, my name is Rhonda Piers. I'm an Oxford native, and more importantly, as it pertains to land and power, I am a multi-generation Black landowner descendant from Jackson, Marion, Lauderdale, and Lafayette counties. So I am a part of their property in all those counties. And I went to Tougaloo College in Jackson, which is itself on an old slave plantation, linked to the American Missionary Association and the Amistad event. And I study Black landowners. So that's my academic bent. And locally here, I'm very involved with local history, preservation, commemoration, and heritage tourism. I just got off the double-decker tour from doing, actually my first. I've been contracted with Visit Oxford for about a year now, and this was my first Black family reunion tour. So they were interested in the parts of our town and the parts of marginalized histories here in Oxford, Lafayette County that we don't often talk about. I talk about all the time, but in general, it's not part of the mainstream narrative. So that's exactly what I was talking about, especially as it pertains to, say, the Barnes Belfry, which I'm a member of that church, which was started in 1867. I'm also its church historian. 1867. On land that was given to Harrison Stearns by his former master as payment for his time of servitude. So literally, when we talk about land and power in the narrative, that's where I sit. Is to make sure that the narrative reflects that and reflects the fact that Mississippi may be the last, not this year U.S. News and World Report, but number 48. We may be the last in a lot of things, but what we're not the last in, we have the largest Black population. We are the blackest state in the nation by almost double anybody else at 38%. And we have the largest number of both black and women-owned farms and land in the whole nation. So land is extremely important, not only to my personal background, but to my research. And I'm done.
Hey, I'm Jennifer Muzenko, dance professor on campus. I've been working with the Slavery Research Group and also on the Lynching Memorial Arts Committee. And as far as this topic is concerned, I really, I know you sat in on that one meeting and we had a conversation, and I like where you all got into kind of putting all those issues together. And I'm just going to be really brief. I came here in 1989. I wish I would have bought a house there in the square. That would have been, I bought a house. And that brings me to tear downs that are happening all over town, and also the square in general. That's a big topic that came up in one of our meetings that we had, and that the square is a taboo place, and lots of issues around the square.
Hi everyone. Sorry for not introducing myself earlier with the camera. I know that makes some people uncomfortable, so let me know if that does, and I'll try to not point the camera at your face. But I am an intern at the museum for CAPE, and so part of my work is also documenting, because if we don't take photos, it doesn't happen. And we don't get to do these programs in the future. So Aida Mercado, I am from Memphis, and I will be in Jackson for now, I guess 3 months. I've been there for a month now. And my relationship to land and power, I'm also an immigrant. And so the way that I think about it is, for a lot of immigrants from Latin America and also from African countries and from the Southeast, coming into the U.S., you want some kind of security, and land ownership and property ownership and owning a home is very important in that, and having stability and security for your own family. But then I also grapple with that because I know, and this has been brought up before, that this land, the past and present stewards are indigenous people that have been displaced from their original homes and their original land. And having those conversations is hard, especially in the immigrant community, because a large narrative is that immigrants built the country, and that erases the history of people that were forced to come here, and erases the people that were here before Europeans came. And so that is another, I think, power move that is used in the larger narrative about migration, is that if immigrants hold this narrative, then we still hold some power over indigenous people because we're erasing them from the narrative of the continental US. So that's something that I have been learning more and developing, and then trying to have those conversations more within the communities that I belong, which are immigrant communities, Spanish-speaking communities, and the Latinx community. Right now, mostly in Memphis, but kind of integrating myself more in Jackson, and also sharing with people who don't belong to those communities directly, but to be able to kind of dispel these things that we hold, these dominant narratives, right? So yeah, that's the kind of work that I'm interested in, and seeing all the different levels, I guess, of migration, especially in the South, because I do consider myself, the South is very much a part of my identity, and understanding how migration has looked like in this area is very complex. So I really like going into that part and seeing how land and power relates to migration.
I'm sorry, what was your name?
Aylen, Aylen.
And if we could go back to you. Thank you.
I'm Elaine. I had no idea what this meeting was about. I saw it on Facebook and came. Whenever I see the word land, I come, because my main interest really is in preserving land, because land is power, land is health, land is, economics, land is, it's integral to history, everything. And I just see it disappearing at an alarming rate, being covered over and us suffering in so many ways. So I just came and I'll listen and see. I'm also a dancer. When I saw the word art in that post on Facebook, art and land, I'm here.
Well, thank y'all so much for taking time to share and listen to each other. I think it's a great way to start a meeting like this, because this meeting is about all the different ways that people come to this topic of land and power. I'm going to speak at length for a minute, so let me apologize. I think it's always difficult to listen to someone speak at length. I try and be a little interesting to help to absolve some of that difficulty. But I want to talk a little bit about this story of this residency and how we've come to be in this moment together. Some of you I have seen once or twice. Some of you have been along for the ride since before I was part of this. You came last summer to the community conversation. And some of you, for the first time, are here today because you read the Facebook description. So I kind of want to, in some ways, bring us onto the same page about the narrative of this artist residency. And I'm the artist, so I guess it's up to me to say that. Again, my name's Daniel Johnson. I am a Jackson-based artist. My family is from Central Mississippi and the coast for generations. Also a family who got land grants from the federal government for stolen land. And I too think about those things, and the rest of my life be working that out, I'm sure. But in my artwork, my medium is social circumstances. I'm really interested in the way that the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are as an individual, the stories we tell about the communities that we feel like we belong to, and the stories that we tell about the communities we don't belong to, really shape the way we move in the world and affect the decisions that we make. And so as an artist of social circumstance, I try and listen really deeply to better understand the definition of these stories, but also to think about how can we tap into the performance of these stories in ways that's not just symbolic, but have practical implications for how we can move together and write that story in a very intentional way through action. And hopefully action that has real practical impact for the everyday people that are part of the communities that we exist in. And so So Kate decided to have these artist residencies. They visited these 6 communities like Monique mentioned. And when they were there, when they were here in this room last July, they asked the people who showed up about their memories of this place, their visions of the future for this county, and collected all that information. It was not a representative sampling of the Lafayette County population. It was, the people who respond to an arts-based invitation that comes from, the kind of notable arts organizations in Oxford. So kind of keeping that in mind, a non-representative population of people had a conversation, and out of that conversation, I as an artist had to look at what they talked about and write a proposal. I try and commit to as little as possible when I write a proposal, because I don't know what people want. I'm not from here. And I really need to come and listen before I can say what would be meaningful for me to do. And so in the initial proposal, I said that I wanted to dig up clay from the land and do something with it. That I wanted to think about exchange and value, and how when we have exchanges with each other, or between human beings, that it's a value proposition. We're thinking about the value that we bring, the value that other person represents, and what is it that's happening across that exchange, where both people feel like they got more value than they put in. And then I said that there would be some type of event that people would come to and collaboratively create. and that we would have conversations monthly that I would facilitate. So this is part of fulfilling that commitment. But I miraculously, in that ambiguous, nebulous commitment, was accepted by CAPE to be here in Lafayette County. And so back in February, I came and did another community conversation here, where I reflected back what I got out of those initial community conversations. And what I got out of those initial community conversations were that people were thinking about real estate and accessibility for living in Oxford. There were conversations about racial equity and the square and access, the thinking about public space and access to public spaces and where people feel like they belong or where they feel like they don't belong. And I looked at kind of census records and kind of projected those statistics that essentially supported these impressions people had. That when you look at the racial demographics of Oxford, they do not look like Mississippi. It is far more whiter than Mississippi. When you go out into the county, it's a little closer to Mississippi, but it's still far wider than the rest of Mississippi. And that was not always historically true, but you could see it happening over time. So that kind of speaks to a sense of belonging, where people feel like they belong and where maybe they're going to go. It's way more complex than I've just simplified it. But for brevity, I'll say what I just said. And then looked at real estate prices over time, and as you know, that's come up here. You know, this kind of this huge disparity between the cost of a house in Oxford and Lafayette County and Mississippi as a whole. So that was a very real thing, not just a feeling somebody had, but a fact. From those conversations, people began to send me to other people, and so you know I would show up with in Robert's office, and Robert would say, "Oh, I met this person, Rondalyn Pears. She was amazing. I think I've got her email address here. Let me give you."
You're the one that ran it.
So it's Robert's fault that I've been bothering. And so I would follow up with that, and of course, people like Rondalyn would be just so gracious to say, "Yes, I will meet you and give you some of my time." And so I just kind of followed these trails where people were getting this kind of very ambiguous language that I often set up, like the description for this Facebook event. But it would be just enough that they would say, "I think you need to talk to this person." And so I'd go and I would go and talk and listen to that person. And so a lot of my work I just talk about is deep listening. I often connected art historically to the surrealist derive, where it's just a kind of a wandering and just kind of following the pieces that seem meaningful to me in that moment and letting myself be directed by that. And so after doing that for 4 months, all these different conversations I was having, I suddenly was like, you know what, these all interrelate around this people thinking about the relationship between land and power. And it's so many different diverse communities talking about things that are very different, who might not ever find themselves in the same conversation. Because it was, Betsy Chapman and local farmers and, Chicory Market thinking about, local economies being empowered by buying food that doesn't have to travel across the country. And that because of the distribution being local and not just being economically powerful for the county, but it's a healthier product. It's also empowering to that individual farm family. It's empowering to the family that feels like they're more connected to the place they live in because they're eating food that grew out of that land. It was talking to people like Janice Carr and Mr. I have to say his name right because he's running for.
Gordon.
Yes, Dale Timothy Gordon. Most
Dale
people know him as
Timothy
Tim.
Gordon. Yeah.
He actually asked me to have a drink with the koozie he gave me. So imagine I'm holding the Dale Timothy Gordon for District 3 supervisor. But it was the Gordon family owning land in the 1950s to be able to give that land to the black community to build a school, the first school for black students in Lafayette County. I'm sorry, I have a historian here.
Yes, but it is the only surviving school building because they just knocked Central down and Bronson Peterson Elementary. So when I do my tours, that's where if I talk about black education, that's the only site I can go to in the whole county.
So the last standing score, and here we talk about tear downs and what happens to history, in tearing down these buildings. And so, spending time at the Gordon Center, and talking to Janice Carr about that, talking to Mr. Gordon about the importance of land, meeting someone like Annie Lee Burke, who turned 100 a week ago today, who, a black family farm since the 1930s, outside of Taylor, and that owning that land gave the family and Annie Lee, more power to be able to be a political activist, because you're not worried about being evicted from where you live. And to go on and for her to be pivotal in the start of the North Mississippi Rural Legal Services, which then, allowed Annie Lee to go to black families and say, you know what, you have legal recourse and I will help you file the paperwork for that, which happened on the square, filing that paperwork. And then, to go out to Roanoke and see, Jason Bolton's going to hate me saying his name, but seeing his exhibition out there and to look at there are two trees that Jason painted in that exhibition that have been knocked over by weather, and just to kind of look at that raw power of seeing a tree splinter, and to kind of just reflect on the metaphysical power related to land that we're subject to. That's quite separate from, I think, the power dynamics we often think about it, where we maybe have some control and agency at times, some of us more than others. And so, I was personally really touched and honored to be included in these conversations and to just barely scratch the surface of the work that's happening in this county around land and power. And it became apparent to me that perhaps one of the greatest services that this residency could perform in the county was to try and bring those conversations to the surface together, and to hopefully create a moment in time when this was the kind of the top of mind in the cultural narrative and the cultural conversation in the county. And so that's how I came to think that it would be useful to try and facilitate the creation of a multi-sector, multi-discipline, programmatic engagement around land and power, where farmers and people thinking about housing and people thinking about the social and political power attached to land ownership, for artists who are thinking about land, the beauty of land, the esoteric power of land, could all come together and be aligned in a conversation that might help more of the public to have a voice in shaping the direction of that dialogue. My background is in all the arts. I had a single mom who was just blessed me to just feed every whimsical artistic notion. So I got to participate in theater, and a musician, and a visual artist, and a political debater, I think is one of the highest art forms. But I also spent a lot of time working for a grocery cooperative and kind of managing all the crazy, innovative personalities that inhabit the membership of consumer-owned cooperatives. I was the director of engagement and learning at the Mississippi Museum of Art, where very, explicitly did just this thing of bringing academics and community organizers and artists together to present thematic programs. And the art in that is that, for me, art is about the creation of meaning. And meaning is something that we create together, coming from all these different directions. And so, when an artist creates a visual representation, they're tapping into all of the history and the concepts that we think about that sometimes we don't call art, but are part of the meaning that makes art powerful. So bringing all these different kind of strains of conversation around land and power that maybe someone doesn't think, well, this is not part of art. Well, actually, it's part of the fundamental foundation that makes art powerful, because it's part of generating that meaning that connects to our personal human experience, so that we can see something in an artistic representation that connects to who we are as a human being. So that's one reason that the invitation very explicitly didn't say this is an invitation to artists to blah, 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 It's an invitation for people whose work resonates with the relationship between land and power. So thank you for seeing that in the invitation, and for seeing yourself in that invitation and coming today, whether you're simply curious or driven along some ideological line to be here. Obviously, Rhonda mentioned this. This is the blackest state in the nation, so we're obviously not in a representative group of Mississippi. But this will be one of a few different conversations that will be kind of community interest conversations, just to kind of bring people together in a beginning moment toward the creation of this program. Thank you for listening to all of that.
And can I say two little things?
Please.
And I'm going to little girls' room because there's not one on the double decker. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I want to remind us where
that you probably I didn't really want you to hear, but I will project. Two things that came up in just the initial round robin, and I hate to talk on the side and then not say what I said, so that's why I'm about to say this. So one, Mississippi is representative of Mississippi. Though we are the blackest state in the Union, settlement patterns are not the same throughout different regions of the state. The reason why most people think that, and it was even written in the WPA's Guide to Mississippi in 1938, is that they confined black people to the Delta and white people to every other part of the state. That never was the case. The standard, even since the time of before the Civil War and on, for what we consider to be the hill country today, the foothills of the Appalachians, the region we're in, is about 40%. There are some exceptions. Holly Springs, Marshall County, our neighbor, is called the Delta of the Hills because they have been majority black since their very inception. But that is not normal in the hills. So they do reflect Mississippi. They reflect their Mississippi, our Mississippi, because this is how we've always been. And the folks at College Hill Switch, they're not on there because they can't buy land in Oxford. That's their ancestral land. It is a huge community of black people out there at College Hill Switch, so that's their ancestral property. And they're not trying to get off of it. In fact, they're the only people that still have housing in Oxford. I was fortunate enough to buy a house, but if you see African Americans around here, they're usually on ancestral land, and they're the lucky ones. So they may be pocket poor, but they are well rich. And most of the development has been done off old ancestral land that was purchased. Because Mississippi has a problem with tenancy in common. We're one of the worst air law states, period.
What you say, we're the worst what state?
Tenancy in common, which is called air property. So we're one of the worst in the United States because if somebody dies and they die without a deed, then all them people have kids, and then, so you end up with like 100 acres on a 3-acre split.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Air. Yeah, like enhanced. So,
Me too.
no. Air, like enhanced air. So those people out there are not poor per se. They're very rich actually, because they own property in one of the fastest growing and most expensive counties in the land. And they may not consider themselves poor either. So it was funny when we said the story we say about ourselves, but also the story we say about other people that we hadn't asked them in that story. We just assumed from looking at them certain things. But I just wanted to clarify those two points that, yeah.
Thank you.
And I'm going to say something.
Please, you can add if you're loud.
It's a phenomenological approach.
We can't hear you over here, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Phenomenological approach. What is a land? Okay, it's for example, my own story. I'm not like people. I'm fascinated by your story. It's amazing, impressive. I'm here only since 2 months, 8 weeks, and I fall in love with the city, with the land. But which land? I can't explain. It's more than a land. It's like the city has a soul that it touched me. When I came to the United States, I'm since 2010. I usually get invited by university. So I was in South Carolina, Columbia District, Philadelphia, New York, New Jersey. And when I came here, I saw around Memphis, Jackson, Tennessee, etc. But when I was here, something happened. Like good food in French, lightly. When a man sees the first time a woman and what is called in English? Good food. Yes, but me with the city. But I can't explain how and what is a land, what is this. It's beyond my understanding. So I'm here, so we will see. So I really need to share something with the city, and I create with the Wayne, so a festival of, as I told you, animation, and I hope this adventure will be interesting. Thank you.
Definitely. I want to say a few things about logistical possibilities, just to give us some frame of reference for what might this look like. And then I think we could go back to kind of talking about one questions you might have, but also how you might see yourself fitting into something like this. This will take the shape of the people who participate. And so, it could end up just being me, and I'll do something small that'll probably last an hour and a half, and back here in this theater maybe, or maybe on the street corner. But it could be something that lasts for a week, is in multiple locations, is a lecture that happens on the campus, it's a performance that happens here at Powerhouse, it's a workshop at the Gordon Center, it's an exhibition in an old home that's about to be torn down, it's a dance on the square. It could be something where there's a single print material with a map and schedule, and it's things that happen throughout a week. And so it just depends on who participates and what it is they're bringing to the table. Certainly, it could be something. There could be something that happens at the farmers market. During the farmers market one weekend. And so just to know that you shouldn't approach this and say, this probably can't fit what I want to do. you should think, what is it I want to do ideally? And Daniel will help make sure that it fits. Because that's my role, is to just facilitate, how do we make it fit? And I'll ultimately, in putting together the program materials, print materials for the engagement, we'll think about all the things involved and of course take in input to write a statement that brings it all under one umbrella as one conversation. So we could ask some questions, because if I forgot something, you'll probably ask a question about it.
I have a question.
Please.
Are these subsequent conversations also going to be around land and power, or is it sort of it's a continuation of this, as this was a continuation?
Just as Monique talked about being part of the.
Sorry for being late.
No. And this is a tenuous reference. I just like to refer to what people say earlier. The museum is part of the nonprofit industrial complex, and so
I'm well aware of that.
and so there's like this discrete time period. In December, this has to be over. So this is like the point in time where I had to be like, you know what? There's now some definition. There's something definitive that's going to happen. And so now we've got to a moment where there's nothing going to happen in this project that doesn't have to do with land and power.
Yay.
Which I think a lot of people are thankful that there's now something they can at least wrap their fingers around.
And this is in 5 other communities around Mississippi. This is happening.
Well, so
With different
there's 2 other communities. We only selected 3. One, and they both reference what the community wanted. So one is doing relationships around community stories in Kiln and Hancock County, and the divisions that were brought about by crossing over I-10 and how geography and industry kind of impacts people's lives there. And the other one is Utica, and that's a lot more agricultural, and it's more about class instead of about intersection, demographic change. This is primarily a very black community, but that's going to get power in a different context. They're going to have quilts based on community stories and a sound installation. So all of these stories are still at the center of it, but how it's manifested in the artist division is going to be different.
So the communities applied, and then you all selected 3?
Well, right. So the community, it was the communities that responded, okay? So 6 communities responded, and then based on which artists matched with the community, then we select about 13 artists applied, and out of those we selected 3. And then this process will probably morph into something a little different in the final year of the grant, but they'll still do something in state. We're thinking about maybe doing something around migration and then giving artist specific themes to address. Yeah. But stay tuned.
By chance, are any of the other artists from the communities they're working with?
So, thank you for that question. Interestingly enough, one of the requirements of this grant is that the artists not be from the community that they're working in, because we thought it would give the artists a unique kind of perspective and they could be more objective. But as we revisit that issue, we think that's not as important, and we realize that the time that it takes to build the trust relationships might be more valuable in creating the artwork and starting the ground running instead of having the long lead up process of creating these relationships. So maybe we could even amplify some work that's already going on.
Yeah, I will. I'm biased. I'm not from here. I've been here for a while, so I've got that insider-outsider perspective. But I get that. But at the same time, forcing us, whoever was here previously and then will be here after us, to go through that process with someone who's not from here is helpful, not just for the artist. And otherwise, I think you default to the relationships you have, and your biases that you bring and the perspectives that you. So I think
Okay, well, I appreciate
it might
that
be more
perspective.
nuanced than
Well, that might have determined who showed up today if we knew the artist. You know?
Ah.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I know his work. Right. You know, or
yeah.
Oh, that's
he
I
cares
think
about what
I mean, I
that's
think
really
there's
helpful.
two options, right? Because one is built on that, and I think there's also people in various communities who would be able to produce, who are itching and have ideas, and they don't ever have the support
So,
or the opportunity.
maybe.
So I think,
Yeah.
well, yeah, and maybe a collaboration or
Yeah.
just different program that would also address, or maybe that's a locally driven thing that would say, an opportunity for artists who are, who have the issue, have the context, and just like, I just need help.
Yeah, that's really
From an artist perspective, like, that's pretty much always the issue.
I like the idea of migration too, in the sense that where so few young people stay that have options and opportunities. So there's that consistent decline in especially rural population where you can't afford to lose people. And so how do you reverse that and embrace it in a meaningful way? It's challenging, especially as it relates to then the amount of power that, and this is the immigration challenge in general.
I find that idea really interesting, especially since it will link to the exhibit that the museum's thinking about in terms of the Great Migration and kind of the gifts that were lost as people migrated, and just how local artists can kind of amplify and connect to that work. So,
Please.
Because I like what you said, because of course I moved away from Oxford and came back 16 years later, including a stint in Kansas. So I like that. And as a historian, we focus a lot on the Great Migration of people leaving. But I think there are two other migrations nobody talks about. One, the Great Migration of people coming back home. Whether they wait and do it after they're retired or whatever, but they come back home. Half of the people on the bus today were, it's like, yeah, I grew up here, and but their family reunion, their concept of home is here. And also, we always talk about the Great Migration, but we never talk about the Great Introgration, which is people of color, Black people in particular, moving around the state of Mississippi, never leaving, but moving to different locations. And my family, that's part of our personal history, because we moved from East Mississippi in 1910, and one segment of the church population moved up to the Clarksdale, North Delta region, another moved down to the Louisiana County line in Marion County. Those people never left the South, they never left the state of Mississippi. But this idea that everybody, not that you're saying that, but a lot of times when we say the Great Migration, people just think everybody ran out of the state, and I think that's also a misnomer, not because it didn't happen, but if we can't see migration in kind of all of the ways, and one of the reasons why people didn't leave is because it's tied to even an older African concept. The South is a big place about place, and I think that bleeds over to the indigenous and the African people that were here, why we're kind of like that in the South, because there's a concept called son of the soil, daughter of the soil in Africa. So it doesn't matter if you're in Nigeria and you live in Lagos. If your village is, that your dad or mom comes from is 6 hours away, you're expected to go back to that village every year, multiple times a year. You're expected to build a home there because that's where you come from. Even the very art form of rap historically is linked to the African art form of telling where you're from. That's what it is. So this sense of place that we have heavily in the South, because we're the oldest part of the United States, also gives way to both the indigenous and African concepts of this son of the soil, daughter of the soil. The home place. Betsy Chapman is my neighbor. We talk about our home places. Y'all still got your home place? Yes, in Carroll County. Yeah, we still got 2 or 3 of our home places from the day, because that's what it is. It's where you're from.
Well, and there's last week I was talking to a student of mine, a non-traditional student who's up here and was looking for housing in our area in county, and somebody told him go back to your country. And he was like, well, that's really funny because I'm Native American. He's from Philadelphia, Mississippi. And
Right.
He's Choctaw. But even because there's not a huge population of that demographic around here, that's not the expectation. Now, there's no excuse for the racism, there's no excuse for it.
Right.
But even this perception in state of who is here and where people live, on a very superficial level, we have expectations about who's going to be where. And so.
Thinking about the difference between place and space. A lot of what we're talking about is place, our sense of place. But we are only here in Oxford just starting to appreciate space, that we're running out of space. Because we were a little dinky town when everyone came and didn't know they had to buy space, a house in town then, that there wouldn't be space 20 years later. And I'm really thinking about, we could make some good art on place versus space.
I think it's interesting, because we were driving around Oxford today. I was here 30, how many years ago? Long time ago. About 33 years ago. And Oxford then and Oxford now is so vastly different. And we was going down these little streets, and there's all these nice little duplexes.
Yes.
Built up, and all that used to be little single-family homes. Yeah, just the only apartments were like out on the bypass. Right. And all in town was little single-family homes.
You lived in 8 acres.
Yeah.
Which is close to the cemetery.
It's getting historic designation in the neighborhood.
Oh, really?
Yes.
It is.
Being gentrified now.
Yeah.
It is.
But that was, that's one of the biggest changes I've seen, other than, other things just growing up. And like you said, there's no space. Everything is crammed together, where it used to be so much more spread out. That you used to have that feeling of space that you can breathe, where now everything it's almost, like what you think of as a city. Things rammed up right against each other. But the change from single family homes to the little apartments really just blew my mind.
Well, when I in 1989, I bought my house. I mean, it wasn't a prestige thing. I wanted to live near the square. It's like people could afford housing then, and I bought my house for $75,000, and now the house. Peggy and I were driving past. There's a house that was going on South 14th Street, where I grew up on the same street with Connie. Okay, that's just sitting here, and you just now the houses. There's one built up that's going to be $700,000.
Yeah, they're building on the top of it.
Yeah,
right.
and
Like
so
they're building a second floor.
I think what disturbed me the most when I watched Oxford changing so much, and it's like when you're driving north on South Lamar, and you could actually see the courthouse. It had the feeling of an old town square. And then Durn at Bancorp South, sorry if y'all belong to that, came in and built a 2-story building. And it changed my whole, it was like unsightly. It was so unsightly to me that I know, people want to be on this, but it's just, I don't know. It bothers me the way the town visually has changed, and I know it's because of, there's many reasons, but it upsets me. But it's not.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just feeling the time. I want to honor y'all's time that y'all allotted for this meeting today. I feel like this conversation could keep on going, which is one reason I've brought y'all together. But I want us to have something concrete, to leave with today. And And so I want to maybe hear how people could envision themselves being part of this. And I want to preface that type of contribution with saying, I'm not asking someone to do something extra. What I'm hopeful for is that you already have something that you're working on. There's something that you're already doing that relates to this subject, and this is a platform to put that into. So this kind of policy work and work you're doing with farmers, to not create some whole new program that's on top of the everyday work that I'm sure you struggle to keep up with, as most humans feel overworked, but that this is a vessel to take something you're already doing and put it in front of another audience. And so in these last 10 minutes, maybe 11 minutes before 2:30, I'd love to hear if you already have something on your mind that you're thinking about. Oh, this could be something that I would love to put as part of this program, or if you have a clarifying question, can something be part of the program?
Yeah, clarifying question in that, are we talking about a day where there's all these activities happening, or are we talking about meetings? Are we talking about all of that? I'm not quite sure.
So it could be something where there's the Land and Power Week, where there's a workshop Thursday evening, and then Friday afternoon there's a lecture at the university, and Saturday there's an exhibition opening. And so I think it really depends on what people want to bring, and how much there is, and then kind of negotiating time and space to fit that.
One of the things I'm already working on, Rama was part of, that we started during a conference in March that we're going to pick up for the community in August. During our Art Limits Festival, is site-specific works on the university campus that are focused on the stories from the slavery history research that's been happening. And Romulan's our docent for that. And we did it at a conference with a bunch of dancers, but now I want to do it with the community members and working with Wayne on making it a camp. For kids and adults to sign up with, and in a way, not acting out stories, but illuminating the things that have happened on the campus through movement, and then it'll culminate as a tour. People, because we already have the tour, but this tour would be come on the tour and see these movement works on these particular sites. So that's something I'm already working on.
And it was amazing.
That can continue as maybe something a part of that week.
Yeah, I'm actually going to do something at Art Limits that's like prototyping what I think I might do for this program later in the year. And I think that this program will probably happen sometime between the end of October and mid-November. So that's kind of the time that I think will probably work better in the university schedule and works my schedule.
Check the football schedule.
Yeah, I was going to say, you need to check the football.
Yeah.
Home games.
And so, we'll be looking at that, but just to give you a sense of that.
I know we've talked about this before, but and Jen referred to it, the group here that is working on lynching memorialization, the history of lynching in this community. We haven't nailed down a date, but it is within the frame that we're going to install another marker. And we have 3, I'm putting this out there, so use your political power. We have 3 of the 5 county supervisors who have verbally committed to allowing us to put a marker on the courthouse lawn, which is really amazing. It hasn't been voted on yet, and so hopefully at one of the meetings in July, it will be on the agenda to be voted on. So if you want to show up and support or continue,
Which two have not agreed so far?
I just want to clarify
they're public officials.
that we do not know that they don't support, but we've only been able to meet with 3 of the 5, and we couldn't have a quorum at certain meetings, or they have to make it a public. So I'm not.
Which 2 haven't you met with? That's an easy answer.
This is where I show my ignorance of their names. They're totally
We met with the chair. We met with the chair. And we met with Busby.
We met with Busby and
the guy with the hat. The shorter guy with the hat.
Well,
like
so
I can see his face.
We're in a political moment where they're up for re-election, so that could provide some.
Is this the EJI marker or different?
Yeah.
So this
There's
is
several that are running for re-election.
let me think about it. I'll tell you who they are.
Okay.
Is there one named Alfred? No. Okay. If you name them, I'll tell you.
Yeah,
Which ones
exactly.
haven't happened. But I don't want to imply that they're not on board because we haven't heard from them.
Yeah.
I just want to. But 3 is all we need to get it approved, technically. So anyway, not to belabor this, but we're collaborating with Sacramento Radio on November 7 around these issues, and so there may be an opportunity to bring this into that conversation as well. I mean, they're really been very supportive, and also to think about, because in at least one of the 7 cases of men being lynched in Lafayette County, it was very much about land and power. Now, there were other complicated things going on too, but to the point that the family feels like they lost their land because of the lynching and had to leave. And so that's very much present in this conversation as well. So I would love, as we talked about, to somehow weave this together. And maybe you can come to one of our steering committee meetings. Talk about that.
Okay, as a visual artist, and I'm kind of representing the Mississippi Plein Air Painters as well as the Oxford Artist Guild. Anything you want to do visually, I'm sure I can find artists that would do something visually for you. I mean, we're always out there painting the land. Give us a theme. Tell us, okay, I want to show the back alleys instead of the square, which we're all tired of painting the square. Honestly. But, I mean, I want you to know that if you have an idea for a visual effect on this, have a show that week, where the visual artists come and show you our interpretation of Mississippi and the land, maybe even the power as far as painting those things that you don't normally paint. So.
No, and this touches on opportunities for collaboration, because it may be that as other pieces of this come together, it helps to inform a prompt for the plein air painters.
Right.
And I could see that during that week, there being a time when the plein air painters go and are painting, and the public's invited to come and see that or participate. But there will likely also be some type of exhibition. I'm working on 2 works that's also part of this that I purposely didn't spend a lot of time talking about, that I'll present during this time too. So I'm also creating some content to do alongside. I think also I think that's part of this dialogue too, is like an exhibit and the plein air.
And the vision that we see, as visual artists, and the different, we have oils and acrylics and watercolor and pastels, and the different mediums that are up there, and it's just.
I think it would be great for y'all to document some of the landowners, like Molly Barr's house or Mr. Van Isom, whose ancestors were enslaved here in Lafayette County. The Gordon Center is still farming. He's 80-some years old, still get up every morning farm. So there are plenty of opportunities to paint.
And I'll give you my card so that I have, so you can, just give us the prompts. We'll produce the work,
So,
Awesome.
A few thoughts. One, when I first kind of went to Burns Belfry, it was the first time I heard about the magazine that used to.
Soul Force. It's the Soul Force.
So, I think there's a story around that, and it's such a literary community. The fact that that's so. The first time I went to Burns Belfry, and they had the Soul Force covers from. I don't know if they're still there.
I'm going to look at them.
I was so surprised in such a literary community that was not really part of the common conversation or like the history of the literary arts in Oxford.
Because it came from a certain community.
Exactly.
So
right.
we know all about it. I can tell you all about it. Still got back copies in my mama's house. Yeah, everybody does.
So I think it's incredible and something that should be lifted up more.
Carol Anderson, I talked to her about them at the Mystic Humanities Council. She's like, those need to be digitized.
Now that would be great.
Yeah.
My mom was
there's probably
college
grant funding for that.
That would be great, and we got the last editor, and we got the whole run, and it's we can do that.
So that's one. I'll try to popcorn these real quick. Two films that I think touch on this concept really deeply. To me, anyways, Dirt and Deeds in Mississippi. Have any of you?
Dirt and Deeds.
We were actually in conversation with them at some point about trying to figure out how to attach them.
Children?
No, the woman
from New York City, from Mississippi. But
yeah.
I'm blanking on her name.
We didn't hear you over there.
There's a documentary on black land ownership called Dirt and Deeds in Mississippi. And
called what?
Dirty Deeds.
It's an incredibly well done documentary.
There's a lot of documentaries that came out at the same time in the Deep South. Somebody did it from the Black Belt in Georgia, and then we've done ours. So there's a lot. There's somebody working in Alabama, so there's a lot of that.
Okay.
So potentially some film screenings.
Yeah, that would be great to have like a film. We could have a film.
But it could be, show it as many times as possible. Yeah. I also think just from your own perspective, like watching it and thinking about that story. And then the Pablo Sierra was he's come up named, but he was an artist here in town that's left. He was illegal immigrant, stayed for a long time, and finally decided he's not comfortable anymore.
Right.
But he was an amazing artist, and he dug clay from here. Not a cent was put into it, and one of the things he was the most proud of was the fact that you could look at his pots and look at a pot made 300 years ago in Lafayette County, and they look identical.
That's cool.
Amazing human being, and there's a documentary made right before he left about him that was really well done, in my opinion.
Where did you film that go?
Spain.
Spain.
So those two, I think, sort of the land and power, land in different ways inform that conversation. Be mindful of the wholeness connection, because there's a pretty sense of power and land with that, and part of the community, important part of the community, in some ways is the community, but also in some ways is not. So that dichotomy. Talking about the school that's being torn down, like one of the things
torn down.
It has been torn down.
I was going to say, the bricks, you can get a couple of bricks starting next week.
We were there for the Juneteenth thing, and it was amazing just to see the whole, like the space there.
I happened to be taking a private tour through that way of black landowners that were prepping for a Black Landowner Summit that came in April, and I was showing them the thing, and we were like, okay, I'm going to show you. It's like, no, they're tearing it down. And she was like, what? No, they're tearing it down now. Stop the car. I had video on my phone.
So that's
wild. I was going to say we need to document that, because
it's gone.
It's a hole in the land, it's a hole in the heart, it's a hole
in the
history.
It's documented.
Glad you have pictures.
So not in the same way, but something that I think is incredibly important to the community is the Boys and Girls Club right across the street.
Yeah.
And that's under threat pretty significantly because they don't own that land. And that's really important for the generations of kids that are going through that and still are going through that program. And to be situated where it is, I think, is really important. And they're struggling financially as an entity, both in North Mississippi, but also specifically the Lafayette County version. That whole, so if that Boys and Girls Club did leave, where would they go? Would they still exist? And that's something that bothers me a little bit. The fact that there's lots and lots and lots of public tennis courts, but not a single public basketball court drives me crazy. And is insane to me. And so that touches on the idea of public space. And so a certain amount of progress you can't slow down, but you can instill a sense of responsibility through policy, enforced responsibility to get back to the community. I think
But you're talking about an outdoor court, because they are public basketball
outdoor court.
courts.
Yeah,
Okay.
where you can just go and pick up and play, like a public space where you can hang out with your friends and shoot.
They used to be able to do it at the teen center. I mean, you did it inside, but there was an outside goal. I know because Burns was sitting right there.
But there isn't. Yeah. Since I
Kids
Still
from-
go, but the door has to be unlocked, so it has to be during hours.
But even out, there was, before they redid it, there was one outside, and kids from CB Webb walked up the hill and played at that court. So there was one.
Joan Ash.
more public space, I guess, is just what I'm getting at. Share the commons and how the square should be that, and at some point in time was in some way that, and maybe it could be that again if it was an intentional part of the conversation. And I think that conversation could be pushed, and I think it could still. I see some really big opportunities to make that. I don't think it's too late, but I think it would make the whole town a much better place for everyone to live and be more attractive for 1,000 reasons. Not necessarily economically for the investors in that property, but they're making enough money anyway, so it's really water under the slide. And the whirlpool trails, which is sort of like the last part of, like, recently the public green space. They were talking about putting a road through, and there was a big pushback on that, and more of those intentional communal spaces that preserve places where the community can come together and be for free, to have picnics, to have family reunions, to go with your kids. Every gated community that pops up, every neighborhood that feels like this is not open to me, makes it feel less like a place people want to live or be a part of. And so balancing that with common space, sidewalks, public transportation, all those things, I think is really important.
In one of the conversations I had with you, and we've had a little bit with the committee, talking about a happening on the square, and a friend of mine suggested that, I was like, well, how could a happening culminate? And we talked about, and we'd have to get permission from the county, but planting something. Planting a different, because there was the hanging tree, but planting something else, that there's a group of people that they are creating a different energy around something permanent on the square besides the, I don't know, it's just an idea I had with a friend.
I think there's a lot of opportunity with the new parking garage going up to take out parking space on the square and put in green space.
Yeah, that's
huge opportunity. The problem is they're making a lot of money off parking meters right now.
I just like to get all the parking off the square and make it just a big cafe.
Or green space. I mean, trees. Plant lots of stuff. Yeah.
And thinking about some of these political things, certainly this program could include panel conversations around some of these ideas. It could include a public demonstration.
We're close enough to
Last thing I'll say, and this is a loaded statement, and I'd love to talk deeper later. I'll also preface it with the fact that, regrettably, we're moving. Hopefully, coming back soon. So I probably wouldn't be able to meaningfully be a part of anything. Historically, the farmers market always was on the square. I really fundamentally believe it should be, and I see no reason why it's not. And there's lots of that could go in a lot of different directions, and Betsy, and everyone before Betsy. But I think an incredibly powerful one day close off the square, fill it. It's like double decker, but local artists, local vendors, not like big name whatever, but. Just to see it, to see what that, and if it was done very intentionally and deliberately, people would look at this thing and be like, wow, why can't we do this every weekend? And the answer is obviously you can.
We used to do that. We used to have First Saturday,
That's
and
what
the
I
First
was
Saturday
saying.
was all local, and I choreographed a whole bunch of stuff, and we did a site-specific on the square, and then what they did was they took all the money from the First Saturdays, combined them together to make Double Decker the first time. Yeah, we used to do that once a month, starting from like April through September.
Bring it back.
Maybe we need to, exactly.
Bring it back.
They were wildly successful.
Yep, it was very popular.
And it really brought the community together,
would be
because the
again.
farmers came in, the artists came
Yeah.
in, the tourists came in.
That's a
The
tough thing to do
kids.
because there's a lot of reasons right now, but I think it'd be a good thing.
So it's 2:38, and I mean, I can sit here all day, but I just want to mark that time. Some of y'all may need to leave, so please feel free. If there's any last things on your mind you want to say, or question you have, please feel free. But if you need to get up and excuse yourself, feel free to do that.
I was just going to tell people who the supervisors are. So Kevin Fry, Jeff Busby, and Chad McCarty are the ones that got verbal.
Yeah, that was McCarty
And
was
so,
the cat.
yes, David Reichert and Mike Roberts are the two that we have not consulted with. David,
But aren't Busby and Fry running for office, and
They are.
they would no longer be,
And that's why we need to get it done.
not
before.
accelerating after the election.
well, no, we're trying to get this done next 2 weeks.
Oh.
Yeah.
Because we need to make sure that it's done, because you don't know, it's a mixed bag, you don't know who's gonna be on there.
We have the marker language, but EJI has to sign off on it, and it turned out we were a few characters over, so they're shaving.
You know when the people.
Yeah, so we're waiting for them to hand us the final language, and then it'll be.
If you didn't put your email address on the sign-in sheet, please do that. Unless you're already receiving emails from me, and then there's no stopping me now. You have to block me. But yes, if you've never gotten an email from me, please put your email on that sheet.
And if you wanted to contact me at the museum, my business cards are also there. So you have more questions about the other programming at Cape, or if you're coming to Mississippi to Jackson and want to see the art museum, I'll give you a special tour. So just let me know.
For those of you who came, I'd like to give you a token of my appreciation for you coming.
Cool.